This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for August 8th, 2018, and I am your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hey, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to look into whether China banned a Winnie the Pooh film because of internet memes.
That's right.
And then Cristina is going to assess whether the Kombucha health claims really stack up. But first, I'm going to discuss Alex Jones and free speech. Are you aware that there is a conspiracy to keep a conspiracy theorist from his right to free speech? Apple, Facebook, and YouTube all banning or removing Alex Jones at the same time is obviously problematic and one more attempt to stifle right-wing voices. Well, that certainly is the take of some of my Facebook feed and in various news outlets. Is that really the case? I want to briefly explore what has happened and then discuss what free speech means in our modern society. And keep in mind we shouldn't fall prey to the single-cause fallacy. Who is Alex Jones? He is a conspiracy theorist who got popular with a radio show, InfoWars. Most notably, he said the Sandy Hook massacre, where 26 children and adults died, was a hoax. And he also thinks 9/11 was an inside job. That's sort of his highlight reel. He has a popular radio show and website called InfoWars, which was available on most major platforms. Then, within a day, Apple, Facebook, and YouTube all pulled his content from their platforms. Given the timing, many have concluded this is a coordinated effort by tech companies, which may have a left-wing bias, to censor Jones and his ideas. Was it coordinated, though? And is this about free speech, or is this about boring old things like money and profit-seeking by corporations? Vox and The Guardian have nice pieces that outline the chronology of events, and I link to these in the show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
For weeks, some of these companies, like Facebook, have faced criticism for having Jones still available on their platforms. A lot of people criticize his rhetoric as hate speech, because it kind of is, and discriminatory towards many different types of groups, mainly Muslims and such. Some of Jones' content had been removed in part from different platforms, or he had temporary bans for a short period of time because he was violating some part of agreement, but he wasn't outright banned or removed. So there was criticism in the air. On Thursday, August 2nd, Stitcher pulled Jones' content, but it didn't seem to make any headlines. It was on Sunday that Apple decided to pull Jones' content from iTunes, meaning removing 5 podcasts by Jones and his InfoWars website. That was late Sunday night. And then hours later, around 3 a.m., Facebook decided to ban Jones and remove his pages. Everyone's just meeting at Facebook at 3 a.m., obviously.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are your hours? Soon after, YouTube also pulled Jones' content. Spotify did the same. Now, earlier, Spotify had removed specific episodes of Jones's podcast for violating its policies, but now all of it was removed.
Yeah.
All of these organizations say that Jones was removed for violating their policies or codes of conduct, not actually with the Sandy Hook hoax issue. Why did it happen all of a sudden, though, while at the same time?
Good question.
Well, as I said, it wasn't quite at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now, whether you find this next part convincing probably depends on your age and your worldview, but I generally think most corporations value money above everything else. It's how they're legally structured.
Sure.
So most social issues where a company might take a stand one way or another is probably based on a cost-benefit analysis of the financial impacts of said position.
Darren, you're so jaded.
I know, man. You sold out to the man. So, if enough people complain, corporations tend to change their stance on things, and I think this has little to do with free speech. Apple likely decided that the risk wasn't worth the reward to keep having Jones on their platforms or accessible through their platforms. Again, it's not an Apple podcast, it's just accessible through iTunes. Yeah. But Apple is such a large aggregator, it's a huge hit to anyone who's not listed there.
Yeah, maybe it's worth sort of clarifying. Apple doesn't host anything. They just kind of an aggregate to point to shows. Like our podcast, for example, is hosted on Libsyn. You can find it on iTunes, but it's not hosted on an Apple server. That just kind of links to the show.
Right, which is a bit different than YouTube and Facebook.
Sure.
Now, after the Apple decision, imagine you're Facebook or YouTube. Not only have you been getting criticism for hate speech that you've allowed from Jones on your websites, but now you get questions, why do you think it's okay to have this content on your site when Apple shows it violates their codes?
Yeah.
Does Facebook allow more hate speech than iTunes? Probably best to just remove it all. Let's just deal with that. This seems very plausible to me. One has to protect the brand. Now, what about Twitter? Well, I think they have a different goal for their brand. And I say this because Twitter did not ban Jones' content. Yeah. The other companies aren't quite like Disney, but I think they want to be seen as positive forces in the world, somewhat like Disney. And my feeling, no data, granted, is that Twitter doesn't really care about this. And I think the good evidence is Donald Trump's tweets. Here is someone who engages in behavior that could easily be removed if Twitter cared about creating a different type of world versus just allowing any sort of free flow of ideas. But they don't seem to care at all, and they don't mind people trolling each other, even if it's the president.
Yeah. I mean, there's also just there's a lot of terrible stuff on Twitter, arguably more than in other places. So Twitter's in this bizarre place where when they take a stand on something, now they have to take a stand on everything that's worse than that.
Now, what about broader free speech notions? Access is often linked to money and power. Free speech isn't quite free. Anyone can usually say almost anything, but if you want to be heard, usually that links to money and power and access. In case Americans are curious, we Canadians don't quite have a right to free speech like you do. We tend to think people can mostly say what they want, but hate speech or other things are restricted. And when I was younger, I thought it would be great if you could just stop speech that was flat out wrong and vile, like Holocaust denial. Now, I'm not sure. It's obviously terrible, and it's obviously wrong, but is it better to let the words be said and then criticized openly instead of going underground and then culminating some sort of, cult-like people who all believe these things who aren't being challenged openly? It's hard to say. Yeah,
people talk about things like the Streisand effect, where if you try to censor something, it'll kind of come back stronger. I don't know if that's proven to be true. It's just, you just call it an effect. It doesn't mean it exists. But I think maybe that's what some people are thinking. If Alex Jones is banned from some platforms, maybe his message becomes that much more appealing to a sort of underground, especially when he's appealing to the conspiracy theorists.
In the first place.
They'll trade tapes with his podcasts on it if it's the only way to get it.
We'll let them trade tapes. But I do think the Streisand effect definitely works for, say, banned books. It's very easy to get a book to sell more copies or have people interested in it.
Yeah.
Now, private companies can have their codes of conduct, and I don't see a major problem with that in general, although one could easily discuss issues of fairness and how these are interpreted and applied. The Google memo comes to mind. Alex Jones can still say terrible lies, but it doesn't mean he's entitled to access the services and platforms of private companies. Perhaps it scares people because many of these companies seem like they're the public square, available to all. But Apple, Facebook, YouTube, and so on are only available to you if they allow you. You could, in theory and practice, be blocked from all of them. It would certainly feel ostracizing and could lead to social exclusion and maybe even depression, like exile in the days of old.
You wouldn't even be able to have a cell phone if enough people block you.
Yes, it's true. But that's the price of being a jerk. Yeah. By whose standards is always a decent rebuttal. Who's going to decide these things? But in this case, I think the decision is appropriate, even if the reasoning may have been driven by profit-seeking and brand preservation. What does the panel think?
I don't have a strong opinion on it. Obviously, I think almost everything Alex Jones says is terrible. Do I think that banning him from these platforms is right? That's not really a stance I'm willing to take. All that said, I'm not terribly upset by it.
I'm mostly with Adam. The idea that he has a platform is fine with me. I'd like to think that most people would judge it based on the merit of what he says. To ban him may drive it underground and just make it that much more popular, and that scares me a little bit.
I agree with you guys. I think the same thing. And I mean, he's very dangerous. Some of the things that he has said publicly has resulted in families, for instance, of the Sandy Hook who lost children having to live, like they're in the witness protection program because his followers have tried to kill them or come after them, or like Pizzagate. The guy showed up with a gun at this pizza restaurant. I was reading a really good CBC News article earlier, interestingly enough, because I didn't know you were going to cover this, Darren, that talks about Alex Jones deals in vicious stupidity, and they talk about his weaponizing of lies. And this writer, Neil MacDonald, says, I'm a free speech, like an enthusiastic gold card carrying member. So he starts off by saying that. And then he talks about, for instance, a woman that stalked and criminally threatened the family of the murdered 6-year-old. And then you start hearing that stuff, and you start to hear some of the stuff he's actually said. And it's horrible. And but again, I'm with you guys. I mean, free speech is free speech, and if he doesn't have a platform.
Wait, so those are two separate things, right? Free speech is free speech. Alex Jones still has free speech.
Yeah.
Right?
He's still on the internet.
Again, he's just a private company said you're not going to use our particular platforms. The internet hasn't banned him. No. And I was just thinking, like, if you, depending on where everyone works, if you say terrible things about Muslims at work, that's going to be a problem. You won't work there for a while. You'll eventually be fired. And so if I ran a company like, 1 million people are listening to horrible things, and I'm enabling that, maybe I shouldn't. And I have the same concern as you guys do, but I'm not. We don't quite know how it works empirically, right?
Yeah.
You can see arguments on either side of this. And I thought we'd get away from the issue of repression and free speech and such and talk about China banning Winnie the Pooh films because of internet memes. Adam.
An upcoming creepy-looking live-action Winnie the Pooh film, named after a human protagonist, Christopher Robin, will not be playing in China. The reason? According to a number of mainstream media sources, this is because of censorship in China, which has been prompted by internet memes comparing Chinese President Xi Jinping to the pantless bear Winnie the Pooh. This story, it would seem, goes back to 2013. An image of the shorter and stockier President Xi walking next to the taller and thinner then-President of the United States, Barack Obama, was compared to an image of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger walking side by side. Later in 2014, a photo of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe shaking hands with President Xi was similarly contrasted to a photo of Eeyore and Pooh. Prime Minister Abe somewhat resembled Eeyore in this case. The Chinese government, not one to put much priority on its citizens' free use of the internet, cracked down on images mocking the president. When John Oliver repeatedly mocked the president's apparent sensitivity over the issue, and also had a scathing commentary on China's abuse of human rights, the HBO website was blocked in the country, and still is today. In 2015, an image mocking the president during a military parade became the year's most censored image. What a great honor to be that image, eh? The original image has the president standing out of the sunroof of a car, which was shown next to a photo of a toy of Winnie the Pooh in a tiny car. These are all very funny. These are all very funny images. Search terms, sticker sets, and more have been blocked on Chinese online sites in the past few years, so there is absolutely an effort by the Chinese government to ban some Winnie the Pooh content. So it only stands to reason that, since the film is not being shown in China, the reason for this is censorship by the Chinese government. They've done it before in other mediums and are quite capable of doing it in the medium of film. They are able to, and they seem to be willing to. Case closed. Or is it?
I wasn't expecting that.
The truth is perhaps a bit more complicated. The Chinese government hasn't actually issued a formal comment on why the movie was banned. When I first saw articles on this subject, all of which put the blame on government censorship, the first thing which came to mind was that a lot of movies don't get released in China. Indeed, buried at the end of the Guardian article I first saw on the issue was this little blurb, and I quote, "Another reason for the film's rejection by the authorities may be that China only allows 34 foreign films to be released in cinemas each year. That leaves Hollywood summer blockbusters, family films, and contenders from across the world jockeying for a tiny number of spots. Christopher Robin is the second Disney film to be denied a release this year after A Wrinkle in Time was blocked, while the studio's Ant-Man and the Wasp will open this month." Well, that's a big thing to bury down at the bottom of an article, and it seemed like a lot of people who read that article didn't really read it from the comments that I saw. Indeed, 34 films isn't that huge a number, and one wonders if Winnie the Pooh would have been released otherwise. And what's this restriction about? Since 1994, China has had a quota on the number of foreign, that being non-Chinese, films being released in the country. US-made Hollywood films here would be a subset of those films because they're not only going to take Hollywood films. His films are shown in Chinese theaters on a revenue-sharing basis. In 1994, the quota allowed for only 10 foreign films per year, and this increased to 20 per year in 2002, and then to 34 per year in 2012. The specifics of the revenue-sharing deals vary as well. The rule as of 2012 allows the foreign film producer, in this case the Hollywood studio, to keep 25% of the domestic Chinese revenue. A small aside to mention that audits have shown that box office sales are often underreported, which means less money going to those hard-working Hollywood studios. There is also a less used buyout option where basically movie rights can be outright bought for a fixed price, though this has been less common as Chinese box office has been quite lucrative. I've noticed personally that many films are obviously attempting to appeal to Chinese audiences, be they by shooting scenes in China, as we've seen in entries in blockbuster franchises such as Transformers, Mission Impossible, and Fast and the Furious, as well as the inclusion of Chinese actors and actresses such as the actress Angelababy in Independence Day Resurgence, and actor-singer Chris Wu in Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. When I see a Chinese person that doesn't really speak English in a movie, I wonder who they're really trying to appeal to. So, with 34 movies, what are the odds that a film like Christopher Robin would have been released in China if there hadn't been this odd Winnie the Pooh controversy? Now, we need to get an idea of the number of films coming out of Hollywood in a year to see how 34 really compares. In 2016, there were some 736 films released in U.S. theaters. That's a big number, but these aren't all of the same caliber as Winnie the Pooh. We can pick this apart by focusing only on films released by the top 6 major Hollywood studios, which had a wide release, that being released in over 1,000 cinemas. And in 2016, this gave only 93 films. So 34 out of 93 is only a bit over a third. Considering films from other countries, this means less than 34 could come from this, around 100 or so major Hollywood releases. Or to think of it more intuitively, there are 52 weeks in a year. And if you pay attention to movie releases, you'll see that more than one movie is generally released every week.
Whoa, multiple myths busted.
So, with 34 foreign films, that doesn't even allow for one film being released a week. There's going to be some pretty big deal movies that aren't going to come out in China. The other factor to consider is just how popular Winnie the Pooh is in China. Now, I can't really speak for this personally since I'm not an expert on Chinese culture. I'm aware of Winnie the Pooh products being somewhat popular in Japan. I imagine it's something somewhat similar in the rest of Asia. Web searches for how popular Winnie the Pooh is in China aren't really getting me anywhere, as they only return articles on this latest debacle involving this film and censorship, because there were a lot of people talking about it.
If only you could Google before the thing happened.
There's options to limit the date range. I didn't really get into that. But, yeah, so much to say. I think people do care about Winnie the Pooh in China. Another consideration is the type of film. Looking at past lists of films released in China, these are mostly big-budget action movies, comic book movies, sci-fi movies, and some children's movies, but those are mostly animated. Dramas and comedies are almost completely absent, and such films generally don't do as well internationally given their fairly domestic appeal. Wikipedia describes Christopher Robin as a fantasy comedy drama film for all it's worth, but there's obviously some appeal to children in the subject matter. So,
yes, otherwise, if someone says it's a fantasy comedy drama, you're like, I don't know if I want to see that. Like, unless it's something from your childhood, it doesn't sound like it's an immediate seller.
No, and those descriptors are sometimes not obviously apparent when you look at the subject matter of a movie, but Wikipedia's got all sorts of stringent considerations for what they use. So is the film censored? Well, that depends on your definition of the word. Are all of the films which aren't allowed to be released in China in order to protect their domestic film industry the target of censorship? You could maybe say that. At the end of the day, I can't tell you why the Chinese government did not choose to release Christopher Robin. I won't do what the copying and pasting mainstream media echo chamber has done in parroting the same reasons you've read online. Certainly, given the recent history of the character, it is plausible that the film, had it been considered to take up one of the 34 spots awarded to non-Chinese films, would not have been released because of censorship. That said, it's entirely possible such a movie would not have made the cut even if the Chinese president weren't the target of this bizarre and somewhat humorous series of memes. I'm not tight with anyone in the Chinese government, and to be honest, I wouldn't be all that surprised to learn that this episode of our podcast is harder to come by because of the subject matter. As of August 16th, trcpodcast.com is not blocked in mainland China. Take that, hbo.com.
Snap.
In any of your travels online, Adam, did you see whether any Winnie the Pooh movies that have ever come out have ever been released in China? I don't know if that's an easy thing to look up.
I kind of try to look at it. It's not always obvious to get it. I know there was a 2011 animated movie. It probably was, but I didn't see any details. But it's certain like Winnie the Pooh has like a name that they call him in China, and there are Winnie the Pooh products in China, and so there is some presence of the character in China. Does that mean that a live action movie of the same topic would have that same appeal, right? This isn't really the same example, but people here watch Sailor Moon, and Sailor Moon gets sold in the United States, and the new show ended up coming out here, but the live action show didn't get any traction here because it's a very different kind of show with a very different kind of market, and it's a very absolutely awesome show that everyone should watch, but that's kind of aside. So,
there's even just timing. Garfield was exceptionally popular in my childhood. They're
yes.
like, let's release a Garfield movie. 10 to 15 years after its peak of popularity.
Yeah, and would that, if a country was big on Garfield cartoons, would they care for the Garfield live-action movie that, is kind of a comedy? It's hard to tell, and there's gonna be a lot of cultural factors playing in on that. And so I go back to that, dramas and comedy having sort of a culturally localized appeal.
Cristina, we're wondering about the health claims of kombucha, but I'm also wondering if people drink it just because they like to say it.
A few days ago, we got an email from a new listener named Cameron. Welcome, Cameron. So I'd like to read it to you guys. Hey, folks. My mother is convinced a paleo diet is ideal for her stomach given her food allergies. This includes grain, mangoes, among many other things like tropical fruits. In a paleo lifestyle book she was reading, kombucha was a recommended beverage for her stomach bacteria as it is a probiotic. A quick Google search says that kombucha's research is scarce and not recommended until more is conducted. Have any interest in an episode topic about kombucha? As I said to Cameron when I replied, I've been meaning to cover this for a while, so his email gave me that extra incentive I needed. Now, many of you have probably noticed grocery stores are increasingly stocking kombucha, and while we may think it's a new fad, it surprisingly, well, at least to me, dates back to 220 BCE, originating in northeast China, where it was used for its, quote, detoxifying and energizing properties. In the 60s, science researchers in Switzerland reported that drinking kombucha was as beneficial as eating yogurt, and so its popularity increased. Now, there is a laundry list of claims around the purported health benefits of drinking kombucha. According to a 2000 review in the journal Mycologist, it has been claimed that kombucha cures asthma, cataracts, diabetes, diarrhea, gout, herpes, insomnia, rheumatism. It's purported to shrink the prostate, expand the libido, reverse gray hair, remove wrinkles, relieve hemorrhoids, lower hypertension, counteract aging, and, of course, prevent cancer.
Of course.
Another popular claim is that it actually helps stimulate the immune system, and that's a reason why it increased its popularity among people who had AIDS or were HIV positive.
Wow.
So what does the most current science say? Now, the Conversation, an independent source of news from the academic and research community, posted a great overview of kombucha in January of this year. It was by lecturer in nutrition Evangeline Matsouris and lecturer and researcher Permal Deo, both from the University of South Australia. It's titled, What is Kombucha and How Do the Health Claims Stack Up? So let's start there. What is kombucha? It's a little complicated. In a nutshell, it's a fermented sparkling beverage made from a green or black tea base. White sugar is added, which has been fermented with a type of tea fungus called a symbiotic culture of acetic acid, bacteria, and yeast, or SCOBY for short. And this is done over a period of days or weeks. The fermentation process is important because the SCOBY changes the compounds normally found in tea called polyphenols into other organic compounds, and it's these that people claim provide added health benefits beyond your everyday green or black tea. Now, it can be an acquired taste. Have you guys ever had kombucha?
I have never had it.
I don't think so.
I think I had it once. I didn't see what the big deal was.
Well, it's got a kind of vinegary or sour apple cider kind of flavor. I personally really like it, but I also water it down when I drink it. You can even find recipes online to make it at home to avoid the steep price tag in comparison to other beverages at the grocery store. It's no secret that foods that are lightly fermented and made from bacteria contain healthy bacteria, and there is evidence probiotics can be useful to gut health for people who suffer from certain stomach-related issues. The theory, as Matsouris and Deo state, is that the bacteria helps colonize our gut, which early research suggests may improve various bodily functions. But just because you ingest this healthy bacteria doesn't mean it's going to colonize your gut. So kombucha or even yogurt doesn't necessarily improve the gut health or benefit the wider population. Current research shows us that any long-term health benefits from probiotics need to be taken continuously over time. What we do know for certain is that eating a variety of healthy foods is still the best way to maintain good gut health. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, you shouldn't be making grandiose claims when there is no legit scientific evidence to support them. There are lab bench studies, including one from 2014, that suggest kombucha may have antimicrobial, antioxidant, anti-cancer, and anti-diabetic properties, but bench studies are the first step in a rigorous process and provide limited evidence. When scientists want to evaluate effects of a nutrient on health, they want to see studies conducted on human biological systems. No human studies have tested the health claims of kombucha, and there are no published studies to date on the biological activities of kombucha in human clinical trials. You don't really have to look too hard or far to figure out why some of these claims get overblown. It's like so many other things. Take the anti-cancer claim as an example. There's a chemical in kombucha called DSL, which is likely its most beneficial component because of its potential to inhibit an important enzyme, which may be linked to cancer growth. Promising, yeah, but once again, this has not been shown in humans, and it's a big stretch to say kombucha has anti-cancer properties. Although serious side effects from drinking kombucha are rare, there are documented effects associated with its consumption, including severe liver and kidney toxicity. And considering the risk of contamination when preparing it at home and the potential for kombucha to grow dangerous pathogens, anyone with a compromised immune system, as well as pregnant or lactating women, really should stay away. So to steal a line from science-based medicine's Scott Gavura, the best that can be said about kombucha is that it probably won't kill you. How's that for a tagline in a kombucha ad? So there you have it, Cameron. Based on the current evidence we have, the health benefits of kombucha are really no better than drinking black or green tea or ingesting other fermented foods.
Thanks, Cristina, and thanks for joining us once again, listeners. I covered how Alex Jones lost his access to Facebook, Apple, and YouTube, and then we had a little discussion about what is free speech and is it access or not. But Alex Jones is still pretty terrible no matter what. Adam explored whether the live-action Winnie the Pooh movie was banned in China, which is possible, but it's probably more likely it just wasn't one of the 34 movies that they happen to play each year. And finally, Cristina explored kombucha and its supposed health claims, and there really isn't much to back it up, and it could actually be problematic. But drink it if you'd like, because it's like tea. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Pooh-boys.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.